When you face the harsh reality of being ignored, it stirs something inside you. It could be frustration, confusion, or even anger. But the real question is, how do we respond when someone ignores us? It's easy to get caught up in a cycle of negative thoughts, reacting impulsively and making mistakes that only deepen the pain. However, it's crucial to approach this moment with wisdom and self-restraint, understanding that our reactions define us more than the actions of others. So let's talk about the common mistakes we tend to make when we feel ignored and how to rise above them. The first mistake is seeking validation in all the wrong places. When someone ignores you, there's an instinct to look for approval from external sources. You might find yourself trying to impress others, posting things on social media to draw attention, or becoming overly dependent on the approval of the people around you. But the problem is that we can never fully control what others think of us. Chasing external validation is a futile effort because it's based on something outside of our control. Instead of seeking approval from others, focus on how you feel about yourself. Strengthening your internal sense of worth is the key to overcoming feelings of neglect. The second mistake is to become overly reactive, responding in a way that only exacerbates the situation. Our emotions are powerful, and when we're ignored, we might feel rejected, unseen, or unimportant. The knee-jerk reaction is often to retaliate, whether it's through passive, aggressive behavior, lashing out, or attempting to guilt the person who has ignored us. But reacting in anger or frustration only fuels the negativity. It's like throwing gasoline on a fire. The situation doesn't get resolved, it only escalates. If someone chooses to ignore you, remember that their behavior speaks more about them than it does about you. Reacting out of emotion in a way that harms your own integrity doesn't serve you. Instead, take a step back and reflect. You can't control the behavior of others, but you can control your own actions. Don't let a fleeting moment of emotional hurt dictate your behavior. Be calm, be composed, and let time reveal the truth of the situation. The third mistake we often make when ignored is attaching our self-worth to the attention or approval of others. It's natural to want to feel seen and heard, but placing all your value in the hands of someone else is dangerous. If you base your sense of worth on how others perceive you, you give them too much power over your emotional state. This is one of the greatest traps we can fall into. If we feel ignored, we mistakenly believe it diminishes us in some way. But the truth is that your worth is inherent, not conditional. Being ignored does not reduce your value as a person, and it doesn't mean that you're any less deserving of respect, love, or kindness. Your worth is not defined by the recognition you receive, but by the way you show up for yourself and others. So when someone ignores you, remind yourself that you are enough, with or without their attention. And another mistake people often make is trying to force a connection. When ignored, there's a natural tendency to want to reach out, to try harder, to convince the person to pay attention to you. The fear of being overlooked or forgotten pushes you to chase after them. But sometimes trying too hard to force a connection only drives the other person further away. When we feel neglected, we become desperate, and desperation doesn't create healthy connections. It creates pressure and discomfort. Instead of forcing something that might not be meant to be, it's better to step back and allow space for the relationship to evolve naturally. If someone is ignoring you, give them the space they need. The right connections will never feel forced. They will happen organically. At times, we make the mistake of overanalyzing the situation. When someone ignores you, it's easy to slip into the trap of overthinking. You might start wondering, what did I do wrong? Did I say something? Is there something about me they don't like? This kind of rumination is exhausting and unproductive. It can lead you to self-doubt and even to invent scenarios that never occurred. But the truth is that often the reason behind someone ignoring you has little or nothing to do with you. People are busy, people have their own issues, challenges, and emotional states that are unrelated to your worth. So it's essential to stop overanalyzing and internalizing their actions. Let go of the need for constant clarity. Sometimes things are just as they are, and trying to figure them out only wastes your energy. One of the most detrimental mistakes we make when ignored is to stop communicating altogether. It's tempting to shut down, to protect ourselves by pulling away, but isolating yourself doesn't solve anything. In fact, it creates more distance. When you're ignored, the temptation to withdraw into yourself can be overwhelming. But retreating into silence prevents you from resolving misunderstandings, repairing relationships, or even letting go when necessary. Communication is key to growth, connection, and understanding. Even when you're ignored, take the high road by keeping communication open. This doesn't mean being overly persistent or forceful, but it does mean not allowing the silence to make you retreat completely. The silence doesn't define you. Your willingness to engage does. Another mistake is allowing bitterness to take root in your heart. When we feel ignored, it's easy to start harboring resentment, to build walls of bitterness. The person who ignores us becomes the enemy, and we create stories about why they are wrong and we are right. We allow the experience of being ignored to color our perceptions of the world. However, bitterness is like poison. It doesn't hurt the person you're angry with, it only harms you. So the holding on to grudges doesn't free you. It keeps you trapped. If you find yourself filled with resentment, remember that you're in control of your own emotional state. You have the power to release that bitterness, to choose forgiveness and move forward without carrying the weight of anger. Let go of the grudges that don't serve you. Be free of the negative energy and choose peace. A common mistake is to define your value by someone else's behavior toward you. It's easy to think that the way someone treats you reflects your worth. If they ignore you, you may begin to believe you're not good enough or that something is wrong with you. But the way someone behaves toward you says more about them than it does about you. What you can control is how you respond. Your worth is not determined by the actions of others. It's determined by how you view yourself. Don't let anyone's disregard of you make you question your value. In these moments, one of the best things you can do is to focus on personal growth. When someone ignores you, instead of dwelling on their actions, turn your attention inward. Use this time to strengthen yourself, to develop skills, and to improve your own life. Take the opportunity to build your self-confidence, to engage in activities that bring you joy, and to surround yourself with people who genuinely appreciate you. Personal growth doesn't happen when you're stagnant, waiting for others to acknowledge you. It happens when you take ownership of your life and keep pushing forward. So next time you find yourself ignored, remember this: your response is everything. Don't seek validation in all the wrong places, don't react emotionally, and don't attach your worth to the attention of others. Don't force connections, don't overanalyze, and don't stop communicating. Let go of bitterness, and remember that your value is not dependent on how others treat you. Focus on personal growth, and allow yourself to rise above the situation. When you do this, you'll not only be able to weather the sting of being ignored, but you'll also come out stronger, wiser, and more in control of your own emotional state. The power lies within you always. When we face the experience of being ignored, it's a deeply personal and often isolating experience. It shakes us to our core because it forces us to confront the feelings of inadequacy and loneliness that might have been simmering just below the surface. This feeling of being unseen can often become a reflection of all the insecurities we've ever had. It can amplify the voice of self-doubt, causing us to question our worth, our significance, and our place in the world. But here's the thing: being ignored by others, in any capacity, doesn't invalidate our existence or diminish our potential. In fact, it can become a catalyst for growth and transformation if we choose to approach it with wisdom and resilience. The key is to rise above the instinctive reaction, to react in ways that only deepen the pain and frustration. One of the fundamental mistakes people make when they feel ignored is interpreting silence or a lack of attention as a reflection of their worth. This happens often in personal relationships, especially when we place a great deal of emotional investment into them. We start to tell ourselves stories about what their silence means, often assuming that it's a direct commentary on our character or value. The danger here is that we start to internalize the silence and let it shape our sense of self. But the truth is, not every instance of being ignored is about us. People are complex, and their reasons for withdrawing or not acknowledging us can have little or nothing to do with our actions. They may be dealing with personal struggles, distractions, or emotional states that have no bearing on our worth as individuals. Recognizing this distinction is crucial in breaking the cycle of self-doubt that often follows being ignored. It's essential. Another mistake is the tendency to engage in a kind of mental gymnastics, where we try to figure out every possible reason why we've been ignored. The more we think about it, the more convoluted our theories become. We begin overanalyzing every past interaction, looking for clues or signs that might explain the behavior. This pattern of thinking can become obsessive and overwhelming, preventing us from seeing the bigger picture. The reality is that we cannot always understand someone else's reasons for their actions, nor should we feel the need to. Sometimes the only solution is to accept that we may never fully understand the motivations behind someone's behavior, and that's perfectly okay. By accepting this reality, we free ourselves from the burden of endless questioning and speculation. We stop giving so much mental energy to something that ultimately doesn't serve our peace of mind. It's equally tempting to fall into the trap of trying to win back someone's attention by constantly reaching out, messaging them, or attempting to prove that we deserve their focus. This often comes from a place of desperation, the fear of being forgotten, or the belief that if we just try harder, we'll be able to restore the connection. But this effort to chase after someone's attention can have the opposite effect. The more we push, the more the other person might retreat. Relationships, whether personal or professional, thrive on balance and mutual respect. When we give too much, we risk losing our own sense of self-worth and creating an unhealthy dynamic. There's a fine line between expressing interest and pursuing someone to the point of exhaustion. The key is to be aware of the difference between genuinely wanting to connect and allowing your own need for validation to cloud your judgment. The more we attempt to chase after someone's attention, the more we risk compromising our own well-being in the process. It's important to remember that we don't have to force relationships into existence, and that true connections are based on mutual respect, understanding, and a willingness to meet one another halfway. If someone chooses not to reciprocate, it's okay to step back and allow space for new opportunities and connections to come into our lives. One of the deeper, more subtle mistakes we can make is to tie our sense of purpose and value to the way others perceive us. This happens especially when we seek external validation in the form of praise, acknowledgement, or approval. It's easy to feel invisible when the world seems to overlook us, and it's natural to want recognition for our efforts. But when we look to others for affirmation, we are relinquishing control over our own sense of self-worth. And our happiness and fulfillment should not depend solely on external factors or the approval of others. It's crucial to learn to validate ourselves, to understand that our worth is inherent and not based on someone else's recognition. When we place our value in the hands of others, we give them the power to dictate how we feel about ourselves. Instead, we should focus on cultivating self-worth from within. This doesn't mean we become indifferent to the opinions of others, but it does mean we shouldn't allow external judgment to determine our sense of fulfillment. We must come to a place where we are comfortable with who we are, regardless of whether others choose to acknowledge or validate us. When we're ignored, it's natural to want to protect ourselves emotionally, to build walls and shut people out. We might want to disconnect from others in order to shield ourselves from further hurt or disappointment. While it's important to protect your heart and set boundaries, isolating yourself completely is not a healthy or sustainable solution. It's easy to become jaded and distrustful when we've been hurt by someone's disregard, but withdrawing from the world only increases our sense of isolation. There is a balance to be found between self-preservation and maintaining an openness to the world around us. We can choose not to internalize the actions of others and allow our sense of self to remain intact. By continuing to engage with others in a healthy way, we can prevent ourselves from falling into a cycle of bitterness and resentment. The key is to keep the lines of communication open, even if it feels uncomfortable or vulnerable. With time, we learn to discern who is worthy of our energy and attention and who isn't. But this discernment can only occur if we remain open to the world. The issue of being ignored can also trigger feelings of rejection, which can be one of the most painful experiences in human relationships. Rejection, at its core, can make us question our worth and our ability to connect with others. But the key to overcoming rejection is to recognize that rejection is not a reflection of our value as individuals. People reject others for a variety of reasons. Sometimes because they are unable to give what we need, other times because they are caught up in their own emotional struggles. It's important to remember that rejection is not always a commentary on who we are. Instead of viewing rejection as a personal attack, we can shift our perspective to see it as an opportunity for growth. Rejection teaches us to be resilient, to understand that we cannot control the actions of others, and to focus on our own journey rather than fixating on what others think of us. Rejection, in many ways, can be a powerful catalyst for self-discovery. It can lead us to explore new paths, meet new people, and deepen our understanding of who we are and what we truly need in relationships. Another mistake we often make when ignored is to try to chase after the person who has chosen to distance themselves from us. This is an instinctive reaction driven by a desire to fix the situation, to bridge the gap, and to restore the relationship. But when we try too hard to rekindle something that isn't meant to be, we may be forcing ourselves into a situation where our presence is not welcome. Trying to force someone's attention or affection can create feelings of pressure, which only deepens the divide. Sometimes the best way to handle being ignored is to let go and allow things to evolve naturally. If the relationship is meant to continue, it will. If not, then it's better to accept that and move forward with grace. Forcing a connection doesn't lead to fulfillment, it only prolongs the discomfort. Sometimes letting go is the healthiest choice you can make, not just for the relationship, but for your own peace of mind. When faced with the sting of being ignored, it's easy to let anger and resentment take hold. But harboring these negative emotions only drags us down. Anger is a powerful emotion, but when left unchecked, it can become all-consuming. The problem with holding on to anger is that it ties us to the person who has ignored us, allowing them to continue affecting our emotional state long after the incident. If we want to reclaim our peace and emotional freedom, we must learn to let go of anger. This doesn't mean we forgive someone for their actions right away, but it does mean we don't allow their behavior to control our emotional well-being. When we hold on to anger, we allow the situation to define us. Letting go of anger frees us from the chains of resentment and allows us to reclaim our own emotional power. Ultimately, the key to dealing with being ignored is to recognize that the power is always in our hands. Our worth, our emotional state, and our ability to connect with others are not dependent on someone else's actions. We are in control of how we respond, and our response will determine whether we allow ourselves to grow from the experience or remain stuck in frustration and bitterness. It's a choice we make every day. The next time you are ignored, take a moment to reflect on how you can respond with grace, strength, and self-respect. Choose to rise above the situation and not let it diminish your sense of self. It's not the absence of attention that defines you. It's the way you show up for yourself and others that truly matters. In those moments when we feel the sting of being ignored, it's easy to fall into the trap of assuming that our value is directly tied to the attention we receive. We might feel unimportant, invisible, or even unloved. These feelings are perfectly natural, but what we must realize is that being ignored is not a reflection of our worth. In fact, when we are ignored, we may begin to feel as though we are being rejected. And in that sense, we can sometimes convince ourselves that there's something wrong with us. But this is a dangerous misconception that can lead to self-doubt and emotional turmoil. There are many reasons someone might ignore us. It could be a matter of timing, where they're dealing with their own issues, and their inability to connect with us at that moment has nothing to do with how much they value us. It could be a simple misunderstanding, where they don't even realize the impact of their actions. Or perhaps they are going through something emotionally taxing that prevents them from being present in the way that we want them to be. It's crucial to acknowledge that the behavior of others is often more a reflection of their personal struggles or state of mind than it is about us. Recognizing this can be liberating, as it allows us to detach from taking everything personally. The more we internalize others' actions as a reflection of our value, the more power we give to external forces over our emotional state. One common reaction to being ignored is to try to rationalize or intellectualize the situation. We might go over the past few days, weeks, or even months, trying to pinpoint exactly where things went wrong, where the communication started to break down, or what we might have said or done that caused the distance. This obsessive overanalysis often leads to conclusions that may not even be accurate. It's easy to believe that if we could only figure out what went wrong, we could fix it and restore the relationship to its previous state. However, this kind of mental energy can be draining, and more often than not, it leads us in circles without providing any real clarity. It's not always possible to find a clear-cut answer, nor is it always necessary. Sometimes there's no specific reason why someone chooses to distance themselves, and attempting to find one can only prolong the frustration and confusion. When we feel ignored, it's important to remember that we are not entitled to anyone's attention. It may seem like we are, especially when we've invested time and energy into a relationship, but everyone has their own life priorities and emotional boundaries. Just because someone has chosen to withdraw doesn't mean they are rejecting us or invalidating us as people. People are complex, and their reasons for choosing to ignore us may have very little to do with us personally. They might simply be unavailable, emotionally drained, or caught up in their own challenges. They might need time to reflect or process their thoughts and emotions before engaging with others. It's vital to accept that we cannot control when or how someone chooses to give us their time and attention, and that it's okay to let go of the need for constant validation from others. There's a tendency to react to being ignored by becoming passive-aggressive, hoping that the other person will notice our hurt and come to us. We may drop hints, post cryptic messages on social media, or make comments in an indirect way. While it may seem like a harmless way to express our frustration, this only complicates the situation. Instead of promoting communication, passive-aggressive behavior creates confusion and increases emotional tension. It's much more productive to address the issue head-on, openly expressing our feelings and seeking clarity in a direct, respectful way. Sometimes confronting the situation directly can be difficult, especially if we're afraid of making things worse. But avoiding the conversation only prolongs the discomfort and uncertainty. The courage to address the issue openly and respectfully without resorting to indirect tactics shows maturity and emotional strength. It sets a healthy example for others about how to deal with conflict while also preserving our own emotional integrity. It's essential to recognize that our emotional reactions are our responsibility, not anyone else's. When we feel hurt, rejected, or ignored, we often look for someone or something to blame for those feelings. We think, if only they had treated me differently, I wouldn't feel this way. However, the way we respond emotionally is within our control. Yes, other people's actions can trigger emotions, but how we react to those actions is our choice. It's easy to fall into the trap of feeling helpless when we're ignored, believing that we have no control over how we feel. But in reality, we always have the power to choose our emotional response. We can choose to rise above the situation and not let it dictate our emotional state. We can choose to stay calm, composed, and self-assured, even when we are faced with feelings of rejection. The more we practice emotional awareness and self-regulation, the less we allow the actions of others to determine how we feel. Another important lesson when dealing with being ignored is to remember that self-worth is an internal concept. It's not dependent on external validation or recognition. If we derive our sense of value from the attention or approval of others, we will constantly be at the mercy of their opinions and behavior. This leads to emotional instability and insecurity because external validation is unpredictable and fleeting. Our self-worth must come from within. It must be grounded in an understanding of our intrinsic value as human beings, regardless of how others perceive or treat us. When we cultivate a strong sense of self-worth, we are less likely to be affected by the actions of others, whether positive or negative. We learn to trust ourselves, to rely on our own judgment, and to believe that we are enough, even without external affirmation. We also must recognize that when we are ignored, it's a valuable opportunity for personal growth. In these moments of discomfort, we have the chance to reflect on our own behavior, our emotional triggers, and our expectations. Being ignored can serve as a mirror, reflecting areas of our lives that may need attention or improvement. Perhaps we've become too reliant on others for validation, or maybe we've been neglecting our own self-care and personal growth. These moments of being overlooked can provide the perfect opportunity to recalibrate, to focus on ourselves, and to strengthen our emotional resilience. Rather than allowing the experience of being ignored to drag us down, we can use it as a stepping stone toward becoming the best version of ourselves. In our relationships with others, we often place unrealistic expectations on people. We may expect them to always be available, to always show up in the way we need them to, or to always understand our emotions without us having to communicate them. But the reality is that everyone is human, and everyone has their own limitations. Just as we have our own needs, wants, and struggles, so too do others. The people we care about may sometimes let us down, not because they don't care, but because they are navigating their own challenges and emotional complexities. It's essential to recognize that we cannot control how others behave, nor can we expect them to always meet our expectations. This understanding can help us let go of the need for constant reassurance or attention from others. It can also help us approach our relationships with more empathy and understanding, acknowledging that people's actions are not always a direct reflection of how they feel about us. There's a powerful lesson in learning how to be self-sufficient emotionally. When we are ignored, it can feel as though our emotional well-being is being held hostage by someone else's actions. But the truth is that we don't need others to complete us or make us feel whole. Our fulfillment comes from within, and when we learn to cultivate inner peace, we are less dependent on external validation. This self-sufficiency allows us to navigate difficult situations with grace and maturity. It enables us to continue our journey, even when others are not paying attention or offering their support. Being emotionally self-sufficient doesn't mean we don't need others. It simply means that we are not relying on others to define our emotional state. We take ownership of our feelings and learn how to manage them in a healthy and constructive way. In the end, being ignored is an experience that everyone faces at some point in their lives. While it can be painful and disheartening, it also provides us with an opportunity to learn, grow, and develop emotional resilience. How we respond to being ignored is within our control, and the choices we make in these moments shape who we are as individuals. Rather than reacting with anger, frustration, or self-doubt, we can choose to approach the situation with maturity, self-awareness, and a focus on personal growth. We can learn to validate ourselves, to trust in our own worth, and to rise above the actions of others. The power to navigate these challenges with grace lies within us. And by embracing this power, we can transform moments of being ignored into opportunities for profound personal growth and emotional strength. In conclusion, being ignored is an experience that, while painful, does not define our worth or invalidate our value. It is crucial to recognize that others' actions often reflect their own struggles and limitations, not our significance as individuals. When faced with being ignored, it's important not to internalize it or allow it to trigger self-doubt. Instead, we must resist the impulse to overanalyze, chase after attention, or seek validation from others. The key is to cultivate emotional resilience, understanding that our self-worth is not contingent upon external approval. By focusing on self-care, introspection, and emotional self-regulation, we can rise above the pain of being ignored and use the experience as an opportunity for personal growth. We must remember that our fulfillment comes from within, not from the validation of others. By letting go of unrealistic expectations and developing emotional self-sufficiency, we free ourselves from the power that others' behavior has over our emotional state. Ultimately, how we respond to being ignored shapes our emotional well-being and helps us become more resilient, empowered individuals. The choice is always ours, to allow others' actions to define us or to stand firm in our own sense of self-worth